Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into episode 81. In this one, you're going to hear about what it takes to manage a remote team. And what's interesting about this episode is our guest today, Kevin Urrutia, is an agency owner, a project manager, a team leader of a couple dozen people in his current web design agency. But Kevin is definitely an entrepreneur at heart. You'll hear in this episode a little bit of his journey before we get into talking about managing a team and what that takes, particularly remotely, which is super important right now and more crucial and timely than ever. But you'll hear from him on how he went from being essentially a gamer and a coder in Silicon Valley for a little while, and how he kind of used his entrepreneurial spirit to be able to go through that time in his life and then transition to building multiple businesses and now running this team. I think this is super interesting, and it's going to be really valuable for you to hear, because sometimes what it takes to manage people and what it takes to run a team successfully is often dependent on what you've been through as an entrepreneur. Your life experience, the things that you've gone through, really will kind of build the muscle for you as a team leader and as a leader. And I think it's really valuable to hear from somebody who probably didn't envision himself as a leader of people, because Kevin he's a gamer, coder at heart, but he is an entrepreneur at heart as well. And I think for those of you who are really interested in code, really interested in the gamer side of things when it comes to web design, this will really kind of ring true for you. But those of you who are interested in running a team successfully, you'll hear some really practical things that we get into here. And it was a great interview. I really enjoyed talking with Kevin. Kevin is not like me. He is a true New Yorker. He's from Brooklyn, so you're going to hear that. He's a fast talker. He's a fast thinker. A little bit different pace than I am, but that's cool. Sometimes it's cool to talk with people who are, vastly different. And hey, I have family in New Jersey, so I know what it's like to show up to a family event where people are talking fast and loud and a little overwhelming sometimes, but it's all good. So really excited for you to hear from Kevin here. Now, before we dive into this episode, this interview and this episode is brought to you by my Divi WooCommerce course. As we wrap up the year here in 2020, I really want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to think about doing e-commerce for your clients. More clients now than ever are needing to get their websites and their products and their brands online, and a lot of them want to create online stores. And if you're terrified of doing that, like I was for years, luckily, you can make it as simple or as complex as you want. And if you want to start on the simple side, the best way to go is to learn WordPress, Divi, and WooCommerce. WooCommerce is owned by the folks at Automattic who built WordPress. So it all integrates seamlessly, very nicely. It's what I power my online store with. So I really want to encourage you to do that. And then I have a course called my Divi WooCommerce Beginners course that will walk you through from start to finish how to build successful online stores for your clients without it being overwhelming and without you having to spend hours upon hours upon hours of learning things the hard way or yourself online. So check that out today. It is open right now for you to join if you want to learn how to build awesome online stores with Divi and WooCommerce. All right, guys, here we go. Get ready to have some fun. You're going to hear from my guest, Kevin Urrutia, on how he went from being a gamer and a coder and then is now the CEO of Void Media and is managing a team of over 20 people, actually almost 30 people at the time of this interview. Without further ado, let's get into it. Kevin, welcome to the podcast, man. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Super excited to be here.
So I always like to start out with letting my audience know where you are and what you do exactly. And I'm really curious and excited to hear about your agency because you have some really cool stuff going on. But yeah, before we get into it, can you just let everybody know where you're based out of and what you do exactly?
Yeah, so I'm based out of New York City and I live in Brooklyn right now. I actually just moved there about 4 or 5 months ago. I was living in Queens for about a year and a half. And then I just tell people all the time, like, I just didn't like it. I needed to get out. Like, I just did not like it. So it's kind of like anything. It's like, I was like in that apartment. I was like, this kind of sucks. I just feel depressed. I was like, I need to go somewhere lively. And then now I'm here. I'm like, it's so much better now.
Nice.
So basically what I do now is I run Void Media, which is our digital marketing company. So that's what I do now. But I guess we can backtrack if you want, sort of like my history there.
Yeah, I would love to hear kind of how you got to this point because Void Media, where are you guys at right now with how big your team is?
So Void Media right now, we're 25 people, and that includes obviously media buyers. So media buyers, it's like a term that we use, but it's like Facebook ad buyers, Instagram ad buyers, and Google ad buyers. We just call it media buyers internally. And then of course we have designers and creatives and copywriters.
Now, do you guys do any sort of web design as well, or do you focus specifically on social media, digital advertising, and marketing?
So this is interesting. So we do like landing pages for brands we work with because we know that helps with like conversions. And so we design the landing pages, but we don't do it in like traditional what people do is like HTML, CSS. We use like landing page builders. Whatever the new thing now is like no code, but like Unbounce and lead pages, stuff like that. So we do that. And then clients do ask us like, oh, like this is a great landing page. Can you design my whole website? We're like, we're not really a web design agency, but we can make these sort of like silo pages just for conversion.
Well, your type of agency is great for my audience because it's an amazing referral partner. Yeah. Because same here, like I ran an agency for almost a decade and I never did social media or advertising or any sort of marketing. I always just focused on web design. So I had a lot of great partners like yourself because it's really a great mix. It's a great combo for somebody to handle because they really are different worlds, aren't they? Like
it's so different. And clients are like, but you're doing this landing page for us. I'm like, yeah, that's one page. You want like a whole like branding website. That's a very different thing.
It is funny, the client mind, because I remember when I got started in web design, I got really good at WordPress and I use Divi by Elegant Themes as far as the main theme that we use. And I got really good at that. And then inevitably clients would be like, hey, I'd love you to run our social media and do some Google ads. And I'm like, I don't do any of that. So in the client's mind, it is kind of, it's all one thing, but it really is separate. So it's great to have, referral partners. Yeah. Now I'd love to hear kind of how you got into this because we're going to talk about how you've managed to build and scale your business and really manage a remote team, which I think is really crucial right now in the day and age we're living in because more and more agencies are going remote with the COVID stuff going on. So I can't wait to dive into that. But yeah, I think a great foundation piece to this would be to hear just a little bit about your background. Like how did you get into Void Media and how did you, in the early days, what did that look like?
Yeah, so my background, so obviously I do marketing right now, but my background is actually computer science. So I went to college for programming. So I went to school in upstate New York in Binghamton, whatever the Harvard of SUNY, right? People call it, right? So because it's like a good school. But basically that's really where I decided to do programming. And the reason why I did programming was because I wanted to build games. Like anybody, like at 17 or 18, I was playing all these online games. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like I want to do this. And early on, that sort of realization just got me excited where like you can make something and then people could actually see it. And I was like, I got to learn this. And there's a game I was playing called Secrets of War. And nothing special. It's just it's like a 2D kind of like text-based game where you can like crawl through the map and you collect gold resources and you build the stuff. And then I was really excited about it. And I emailed the guy and I was like, his username was like Hotcut back in the day. Like everybody's using usernames. I was like, how'd you make this? And he actually responded. And he's like, hey, I use like C# and Cold Fusion. And I was like, oh, like what is that? I've never heard of this stuff. And then that's when I found out about like web programming because I first obviously, program is like C++, Java. I was like learning that stuff. And he's like, oh no, like that, you can learn that, but it's like a different type of game that you can make. So that was like at 17 or 18. And then that's when I was like, okay, I got to learn programming because I was like reading these books. Like I got picked up like HTML for Dummies, like, the For Dummies edition, CSS. And that's kind of how I got to learn more. And then I really was diving into like JavaScript. I was diving into HTML, CSS. And I'm not sure if you know this guy, Raji King, Raji, he's like name on Twitter. He had like this website that showcased his portfolio. And it had like these leaves growing on like the website, very animated, super animated. And I was just like, I forgot how I found him, probably some like NetTuts or tutorial site, right?
Yeah.
And then I was just like, I emailed him and like, I was like, hey, like, it's so funny because I looked at the email. It was just like the most broken thing I've ever written in my life. And then he actually responded to me. He's like, hey, this is how I did it. You can do HTML. You have to learn HTML and CSS. And that's crazy because like, think about that time. I was like 18. I was just like, I just randomly emailed this guy and he responded to me. And I was just like, whoa, it's so crazy. And he actually told me what to do. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. So then when I went to college, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this in college. But then in college, I realized that computer science was actually like the science of programming, which is not like the actual visual stuff, right?
Oh, it sounds like, awful. Yeah. Like it just gives me nightmares thinking about what you had to go through in that.
So that's when I realized, like in computer science, we're learning about algorithms, data structures, right? Stuff that's like important. But for me, I've always wanted to be like not the back end type of person. I want to be like the person
more
in the front end.
Visual.
Yeah.
That
visual stuff got me excited because like I want people to know what I make, not be like, people don't care about the algorithms. It's like, okay, well, it just works, right? But for me, I've always had that like, I need to show people this is what I did, and you can actually play with it and touch it. And that's where I got into like web design and programming. And that's when I started learning like PHP, because I was like, okay, like how to make a website. Yeah, people probably listen to it like, yeah, it's obvious. And like dynamic websites, what's databases, MySQL, right? All that stuff back then. So then I started learning a lot of that, building all these web stuff. And then I picked up Ruby on Rails. So David Heinemeier Hansson just came out with Ruby on Rails. And when Ruby on Rails came out, I was like, whoa, like this is so crazy. You can make websites and web apps in like 5 to 10 minutes. And that's like the USP of Rails back in the day. It's like, hey, make a weblog in 10 minutes. And
just for people's reference who might not know, that's the co-founder of Basecamp, for anyone who's curious. Because I kind of forgot that he had a hand in that. And then because that was before Basecamp, right? Before
it was like right in that same like kind of period they're developing Basecamp plus like this framework to build it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, that's how like old I am. Like I was like right in that like era of
what year? Yeah. I was curious, what year was that? Like what years were you getting into all that?
This was like so I'm 31 right now. So I was probably about 19-ish at that time.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So probably like early thousands.
Yeah. Right. Really, really early on. And when I first saw Ruby on Rails, I was like, whoa, like this is like what I want to learn. And at the same time, I was also learning, I'm not sure if people know like jQuery. jQuery was like the biggest thing back then. Like before, it's so crazy. Like
it's still powerful now. I have a lot of designers that do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like John Resig, he's like the founder of jQuery. When I first found out about jQuery, it was like another one of those like whoa moments, like a library that allows you to do animate, to do text animations, to delete, to like, it sounds so obvious now, but back then it was just like, whoa, like you have to do so many hacks. And then you install jQuery and it's like $, dot, the element, and then animate. And like, okay, it's like, whoa, that's like magic. And yeah, it's like now it's obvious, but it was so crazy back then. So when this sort of, at the same time, this sort of fueled my curiosity, because I was like, wow, like what I want to do. And there's also other people like this in the space are also pushing this forward. And I think that sort of helps you get excited even more, because like, you probably know, like back in the day, like when you had to like program a website or do HTML, it was like, okay, I got to check IE8, got to check IE7. Okay, I got to do this hacks here, all this crazy stuff that like, it was so annoying.
Well, and for the people who are listening to this and they're like terrified getting further into web design, the good news is you don't have to know any of those languages now. I know a little bit of HTML and I love CSS, but that's it. Like I can barely do any PHP. I don't do jQuery, even though I can tweak it a little bit. That's it. So that's the beauty about WordPress and a lot of the builders nowadays is you don't have to go that route, but you can. But it's interesting to hear that you started there. And then, like, did you do freelance web design before getting into the marketing aspect? Is that kind of how you pivoted there?
So in college, I was still like maybe a junior in college, and I then started doing like iOS development. And then that's when I created my web development agency called One Tiny Bit. And there we specialized in Ruby on Rails and iOS development. And
I love that name, by the way, One Tiny Bit.
Yeah, it's like,
that's great.
We're like, oh, because I started with Wilson, and he's actually runs the agency right now. So he's a designer. So I was a programmer, and he was the designer. So we're like, oh, like we both love doing this thing. Let's make our agency, and that's how we started One Tiny Bit. And in college, we created like a bunch of iPhone apps, but at the same time, for jobs, we were just going to Craigslist and going to like the local Craigslist and like emailing people saying, hey, you looking for web development? Hey, we're this college students. We have an agency. We'd love to chat with you. And we just got some jobs, and like people were paying us. And like any freelancer at the time, like remote work, that was the thing that we did. It's like for me, it was like kind of like funny. It's funny now. People's like, oh, how's remote work? I'm like, I was used to it like in college because like that's what I did, right? It's like this is how I worked. I was still in college, and people were not in college with me. Yeah, so.
Yeah. I think that the pandemic in 2020 here, I think it's really for web designers. It's been interesting because our lives really don't look that much different.
No,
like when everybody went remote and got used to doing Zoom meetings and then just started working from home, it was like culture shock for so many people, but. For web designers, we're like, well, welcome to the club. We've been doing this for years.
That's the funny part too, because like I was like, I kind of got out of that sort of phase because once I started working, but like in college and throughout life, before my first time job, I was like programming at night and weekends just at home, and that's like life. That was. But anyways, that's how I did it for one tiny bit, and then we're doing that for about a year and a half. And you know, like anything, like it was fun. We got some clients. We were going to Craigslist. We were going to Reddit to sort of like for hiring section and posting like, hey, where are these college students? Hire us. And we got some jobs. I learned a lot, like how to price things, how to estimate, like all this stuff that you're so aggressive with your estimates in the beginning. You're like, yeah, it's going to take me like a month. And it's like, no, it's not a month. It's like 2 months. And then you're like, oh crap, I charged way too little for this. And like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the comment. Everyone always underbids and estimates how long it's going to take. Yeah. So for anyone just starting out, you're not alone. Don't feel bad if those first couple of projects go 3 times longer than you think, or 10 times longer in some cases.
And then you realize cause it's so funny because like you'll see like a client will be like, hey, look, another freelancer is charging me like whatever, 10K. You're charging me 2K. And you're like, yeah, like I can't believe they're charging you that much. And then you're like, okay, I can see why. Like they have experience that like you know.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that, Kevin, because when I first got into the web design game, I remember I was charging like $1,000 or $1,500 for sites, and I had a mentor I talked with who had a local agency who he was like on a different level. He was doing very high end projects, but even some basic portfolio projects, I would ask him, "What would you charge for this?" And he was like, "We probably charge about $10,000." And my jaw dropped to the floor. I was like, $10,000 for this? I was like, that just doesn't like why, you know, I didn't understand. And then a few years in, I started to realize, that makes perfect sense. Like if you actually want to keep money in the business and not go broke, then you actually need to charge more. And it just goes back to sharing the value and making sure a client understands. But yeah, that is interesting to hear because I'm listening to you and I'm seeing kind of a progression going from a problem solver, a dabbler, designer / dev to, it sounds like you're entering the world of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. Is that kind of what segued into starting Void Media?
So pretty much, yeah. So basically after I did this, I wanted to go to California because that's like the tech mecca. I was like, like I was following like TechCrunch, TechMeme, all the tech blogs, like Twitter was coming up. And I was like, everyone's like, you got to go to San Francisco. You got to go to Silicon Valley. And after college, I got a job at Mint.com. So I was like, okay, let me just go there. And I literally have never been to California besides when I first moved there for my job. People were like, were you scared? I was like, yeah, I was scared, but like, this is like what I wanted. Like, this is the dream. I was like, I have a chance to go here. I'm gonna go do it. And so I went there, I went to Mint, and I tell people all the time, like, Mint is a great company. It's like a great known brand, but within like the first like 6-7 months, I knew I didn't like it. And obviously you probably know people like, oh, just like you're right out of college. You could stay there for 2 years. I was like, what? Stay here for 2 years? I was like, no way. I was like, I'm not like, I just know already. And then I left and then I went to work for another startup called Zarly. And there I was there for like about 2.5 years. But during this time when I was working at Zarly, I was still doing like web development projects on the weekends. I'm not sure people still do this now, but we do a lot of hackathons on the weekends and like startup weekends, which is like 48 hours of coding, just like staying up all night, making projects. That was so fun. There was one called Social Local Mobile. This is like when Social Local Mobile was like first coming out. And we made like kind of like a Foursquare competitor, which is like kind of like local places around your area with reviews. And we actually won. And that was so crazy because I'm like, I've been to like so many of these and I finally won. And then we got a free trip to San Diego and we actually pitched to Qualcomm Ventures. And that was like a great experience of like, oh, whoa, like everything I've been working for kind of worked. And it's like, this is kind of exciting. So I still was building stuff and on there. But then like I was building like random websites. But anyways, after I was at California for about 4 years, I was like, oh, I want to go back home. So that's when I moved back to New York City. And then that's when I started my first company, which was actually not Void Media, but it was actually a maid company. It's called Maid Sailors. And we're still running it right now. We're in like New York City, Boston, Chicago, New Jersey, and Brooklyn, obviously. We have like 150 to 200 maids right now. It's still running right now. But that's sort of like for me into like how I got into like more of a marketing, because I was like, I can build all these great products. I can build all this stuff that's like looks kind of good. But how come nobody's using it? And that was like the question that like was like always like tricky for me. Right.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about your experience in Silicon Valley and that just arena, because I interviewed Kenny Singh, who's one of the creators of Divi, and he had a very similar story. He worked for Google. I think it was episode 44 I had him on, and he told me the story about how he did the same thing. He went to Google. He had actually worked for Elegant Themes prior to that and helped create Divi, and then took a job with Google. And while he was at Google, he felt that same type of experience. He just didn't feel like the work was that impactful, and it wasn't making that big of an impact. And one of his managers at Google was like, we should do something like this theme I just found. And it was Divi. So it was like the work that he did before, you would think like, if you tell your family members I'm working for Google, they're probably like, wow, he's working for Google. Whereas they don't know what the heck Elegant Themes is. But he got so much more impact and so much more just fulfillment from working with Elegant Themes that he went back there, and then it's that's where he's been happy ever since. So that's a good lesson. Just sometimes the grass looks greener and things on paper sound awesome, but you get there and sometimes you just you don't have to follow that path that maybe looks cool or sounds cool to the world. But it sounds like you made the right decision with sticking with your gut with
and I think exactly. People always ask me like, like even now I tell people like, oh, I worked at Mint. It's like, whoa. I'm like, yeah, it's like you still get that thing, but I'm just like, I tell people like within a month, I knew. Like when you know. Like it's like I was like, whoa, like this is not what I want.
Yeah.
And like I always tell people, just go with your gut. And it's one of those things where like anything in life, it's like your friends, your family, they'll always kind of want what they would want. But if it's not what you want, you have to just make you're the one living your own life. Like it's like they're not living it for you. And sometimes it's like you got to please both. But end of the day, you got to please yourself. That's what at least for me, it's like I always.
Well said. Yeah. It's your story. Yeah, that's huge. And I'm curious because I'd love to talk about the building your team and what you've done with this agency. But I'm really just one last question on this. Do you feel like all of your experience has helped you just appreciate what you're doing now more?
Oh yeah, for sure. I always tell people like it's like a stair-step approach. Like you the first company you build, the second one you build, like you just get better. And when I say better, that means like you just learn from the mistakes. Like, okay, like this is how you do an LLC. This is how you do a website. Like for me in the beginning, like I was building my own websites through coding because I was like, I'm a programmer. I'm going to do it myself. Now I'm like, no, I'm going to use WordPress because it's going to be so much easier and I don't have to do anything. It's like, let me get a nice theme and then go from there because I want to make the business, not like the website spending like 2 months building it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. You do. You learn from every experience and it translates. So that's one reason I love web design. So many different industries translate. And even I know from my experience in running and scaling my own web design agency, when I started this personal brand and doing courses and teaching other web designers, I took this to 6 figures in year one. Yeah. And a lot of people are like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, I literally did everything that I tell my clients to do when I ran my agency, when I told them about email marketing and just being consistent and, keeping your mind fresh, doing all the basic stuff. That's what works. So it can translate. So with Void Media, how did you start scaling? Because you got 25 remote workers now. I'd love to talk about how you manage them, but to kind of backtrack a little bit from that, how did you start to actually hire them? Like, was it people that you knew from your network in these different tech industries? Was it, Indeed, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So one of those learnings that I learned early on was don't hire your friends. So that was one thing I was like, when I started Void Media, I was just like, me and Wilson were just like, we know we've had bad experiences from previous companies where the relationship gets hard between like, it's a friend plus a worker. And then when you like correct them, it's like affects your personal relationship. So then a thing that we did at Void Media was like, we're not hiring friends ever. And that kind of what it's before. It's like, you just learn. Like some people will tell you, but then once you actually experience it, you're like, okay, yeah, like, no, I can see why people do that now. But anyways, how we started hiring at Void Media was, it was myself and Wilson, Wilson's other partner. He was a designer. So he actually worked at Google. So, so we started hiring through, in the beginning, it was a lot of people found us through LinkedIn. So like one of our first hires that we have would just emailed me on LinkedIn. And he's like, hey, Kevin, I heard you're hiring. I'm actually looking for a job. And then we brought him in the next day. He was actually in New Jersey, and we got him in, right? Very, very crude interview process at that time. This was like, yeah, it's like literally.
I feel like any business that's just getting started, nobody has a great interview process unless you took it from a previous agency.
Yeah. So that's how we did that for that. And also remember, like, we started a web development agency, but like the web development agency over 10 years ago was just me and Wilson and like a freelancer that we hired. But now this is like, we're actually growing this thing now. So we hired him, and then we just started posting on AngelList. I'm not sure if people have heard of it, Angel.co. It's like a startup sort of platform. And that's really where we get a lot of the talent right now is AngelList. The reason why I know about AngelList was because during the when I was applying for tech jobs, that was the biggest thing that people would use, and had a lot of like these like tech workers, kind of like web designers, web developers that have like this sort of problem solving skill. And that's what we're looking for. So we started hiring from there. And then we were also posting, I think probably like, you know, too, Josh, is like post on these Facebook groups or communities and talk about the work you're doing. And then I hired my first guy that was remote. So this is funny because Wilson, he's actually been remote. So he lives in Taiwan. So we were always kind of like this remote type of company. So like, it's not like he's here. So going back to our days before, it's like, we were always like, yeah, like we can work together. Like, I know you don't need to be next to me.
I feel like that kind of sets the precedent for the company. Like if the two founders are remote, then the team's naturally probably going to be remote. Whereas it's probably a lot harder when there's a core team that's in a location together, and then you start hiring remote.
Yeah. So like, that's like, it's like in the beginning, we were like always like, in this beginning, we were always in this phase of like, are we going to have like a central office? Because we like being in New York City, because obviously as an ad agency, people are always like, you're in New York City? Oh my God, it's like that allure, right? It's like,
I'll be honest, man. I actually wanted to start making some connections with people in New York City because I don't. So I think you're just about my first colleague who's in New York City. I really don't have any connections there. I have a lot of Chicago and LA and San Francisco now, but nothing in New York. So you're my first, man. I was very curious.
Yeah. So it's like, that's like kind of like, oh, we're going to say we're New York City, but Wilson was actually in Taiwan. So Wilson's like one of those traveling nomads where like every 6 months he lives somewhere else. So he's in Chile, Thailand, Taiwan, or Canada. He just travels anywhere, right? So because he knows
another benefit of web design or any sort of online ad agency or marketing industry.
Yeah. So then my second guy, he is actually from Slovenia, and he found me through he messaged me on Facebook because I was posting on like these Facebook groups about like ad creatives, ad copy. And he's like, hey, Kevin, like, I'm looking for a job. I don't have too much experience. Would you like hire me? I was like, yeah, of course. Like, come in. Like at that time, like you're just like looking for people because you're just like, we had like enough clients. We're just like, we kind of need help. It's like, it's always that balance of, I mean, you probably know, like you have enough clients, but then you need help, but then you're kind of like, you're strapped for time because you're also trying to onboarding new clients. You're trying to like do sales calls. So it's like, it's always a balance. It's so hard in the beginning to kind of like manage. So we're like, hey, we'll bring you on board. And he was actually good. We're like, oh, wow, he's actually good worker. And then that's when we started hiring him.
And did you, in regards to the clients, when you started Voy Media, did you have a lot of clients from your web agency and your network? Or did you have to really build the clients up first before you started scaling?
Yeah. So in the beginning, like I never really told people I had like my old stuff. So basically how I started Voy Media was because I had another e-commerce company that I started called Montum Outdoor Gear. And we were still running that company. So we're selling like hiking poles, trekking poles, outdoor gear. And then we started another company called Chester, which is another e-commerce company.
Man, I can't keep up with all these companies you're making, man.
So like for me, it's like kind of like saying like, I just like building stuff. So when I started Voy Media, I was never told people I made these companies because I was like, cause I was still running them. So I didn't want these people to like the potential founders to be like, hey, how can you run Voy Media plus the other stuff?
Sure.
Right? Because in the beginning I thought that was like actually like not good, but for now, like we're much bigger now, like 25 people. That's like the first thing I lead off with. Hey, by the way, I have these e-commerce companies, so I know how to like grow your business. And that's just like kind of like just.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
It's like a shift in like the mindset of like the business owners, like, hey, look, like check it out. Like I know what you're going through. So
it also, if you have a team of 25 people, you could probably have a little more room to say that you have other businesses because it's clear that you're not doing all the work. Whereas I'm sure in the beginning, if you're doing all the work, all the sales, all the development and the deliverables, you can't, you're going to just spread yourself too thin. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't tell anybody that for the longest time. And And then now I'm just like, that's a big pitch that we even mentioned, like right in the first deck. Like, this is my businesses. Like because like you probably know, like running a business and like e-commerce, web design, it's the business itself. It's kind of the same sort of skills you kind of need. Like you need to know how to hire, fire, train people. And of course, like the actual output is a separate thing. Right. So,
Yeah.
But anyways,
That's well
sort of
said.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. There's a lot of transferable things just from a business perspective as a business owner that it really doesn't matter whether it's web design or marketing or even a completely different industry.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the same stuff, sales and how you manage people and how you manage your time. That's all just basic stuff.
That's just basic. Yeah. Like time management, it doesn't matter. Like time management for e-commerce, time management for web design. It's like, you still got to manage your time. Like it's still tasks. But basically that's kind of like how we started hiring more remote people. And of course, at this time, we were started using Slack. Slack was like the biggest thing that we had, like to just talk remotely. And then of course, like Gmail was like the biggest thing that we also did. But then at the same time, we were kind of doing a lot of like just, I'm not sure if people know, but Dropbox is popular, right? But there was something called Dropbox Paper. I'm not sure if people have heard of it.
I saw it, but I don't know anything about it. I was curious what the difference was.
So Dropbox is like the hosting platform, but then Dropbox Paper, think about it as like Google Docs on steroids, where like you can add like videos, images, clips, to-do lists. It's like a paper that's kind of like you can do anything on it. I'm not sure if you heard of like
is it more like an interactive type of Google Doc?
Interactive Google Doc. Have you heard of like Notion? Notion.so?
No, I haven't.
So Notion's another one like that. That's like this like new revolution of like Google Doc is kind of like a text-based thing, and now these platforms are just like making it more interactive, where like you can add to-do lists, you can add check marks, you can pretty much make it into like an Airtable, which is like a table list, like all this sort of.
Okay.
It's like kind of like a building block of like your mind, where it's like,
yeah. I was just gonna say, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Sorry, Kevin. It does seem like there are a lot of platforms now that are really integrating project management, team management, task managers. Yeah. Documents all kind of together, particularly from the team perspective, because when you're managing 25 remote people, you've got to have something like that to keep everybody there.
And like that's what we were using all that before. We had like one, and the thing about Dropbox paper was nice at that moment was that like you could see when someone commented. It'll say like Kevin, Wilson, and then so basically we just had one sort of document for each client, and that's how we managed it. Like we would add to-do lists. That's how we did it remotely. But now, much bigger, we use Asana now. So Asana is like a traditional project management tool.
Yeah. So you're starting to scale the agency. When you got your first few hires, did the next round of hires when you started scaling, did they come from more places like AngelList or stuff like that? Or was it like people they knew? I guess the question is, did the hiring process change once you had a few people already in place?
Yeah. So once we had a few people in place, we definitely changed the process, because at this time too, we were seeing like cracks in the people that we've hired.
Okay.
So like anything, you have to evaluate the people. It's like, okay, like what you told me was not true. Like, it's like what you told me was not true. And then like you start to let go of people. And then now we have a full hiring process that's 4 rounds, very structured process that we learned from a book, I think. And we basically were just like, me and Wilson were just like, where are we going wrong? Like, we need to make this hiring process a lot better. So how it works right now is we have like a first round, which is 30 minutes, which is like kind of like a get to know you interview. We have a second one that now talks about a little bit about your career goals, what you want to do with your life, just kind of like your curiosity. We call it a curiosity one. Then we have a third one, which is now a full in-depth review of your resume, where we'll ask you, what were you hired to do here? How were results measured? What was the outcome of the results? What did you like? How was your boss? How was your team? And we're just like looking for key things, right? Here. And then we have the fourth one, which is, I think, is the most important one, which I actually, funny enough, because like before this call, I was actually doing it for an interview. It's just the reference one, where you just call people that you've worked with and you ask them, how was Kevin? How was they working with? And you get a lot of great insights and feedback in just the reference one, because we've seen it before where the first 3 are really great, and then we call the references, and then they're like, yeah, like I never really worked with him. I'm not really sure why you put me. And we're like, okay, that's weird. Like that's a weird one, right? Yeah.
And what was the book that you mentioned that outlined that process for you?
I have to get it for you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let me know after. I'll put it in the show notes.
But
Yeah.
now, like this whole process now lives in Asana too, where like we have like a template, and then the template's like, this is what you're asking, this is how you ask it, this is how you get the question, this is how you get the answer to the question you're looking for. Very detailed, because remember now, me and Wilson aren't the ones that's hiring. We know the process where we set it up, but now we pass it on to like a project manager or like the head of the department says, hey, this is what you do. Because
you need to decide, are you the business owner, the visionary, or are you HR? Are you the hiring type of person, particularly at your level? Yeah. Now, are you guys using Asana for just internal team stuff, or is that for client facing stuff as well?
So this is funny because we always battle like between that. Like a lot of it right now is internal, but then some clients are like, can I get access to the Asana board? And we're just like, yes. So we're like, all right, we'll give you like special access. It depends on the client. But we use it a lot for internal stuff. Yeah, like creatives, ad copy, like where they're on the roadmap. But it's pretty much how we live. Like in that, for remote teams, I think having some sort of system like this is so necessary. Like in the beginning, kind of what I was saying before, we were on Dropbox Paper. And when you're hiring more people, we're just like, wow, this isn't scalable because now I don't really know who's updating who, like how do I tag people, all this stuff. And then we had to actually go through a process of researching project management. What's going to be Monday? What's going to be Asana? What's going to be Paper? And then we actually had to, it's crazy. Like you have to do like a presentation on it. It's like, okay, this is like,
Well, I know I use Basecamp for both internal team and client. And one reason I love Basecamp is you could set up private threads with just your team within one project. So like this thread was for this client.
Yeah.
But my agency at its peak, I was managing one full-time freelancer and some other subcontractors. So I could manage it. But with, I imagine once you get to like 5 or 10 people, it's got to be something that is a task type of manager that can, everyone could see because otherwise you got to get everything out of your head, right? I imagine that's 101 when you have a team.
It's too hard. And like, it's like anything, but even like anybody, it's like, you're always kind of like growing and trying to figure out what the issues are. Because some people pick up the tools quicker. Some people are like, no, you're using it wrong. Like, this is not how you tag somebody. This is not how you upload a file. And we actually, even just now, like anything, you probably know, like as a business, you're always constantly evolving. Like we were using Dropbox for the longest time. And now we're just like, okay, right now we're doing Asana, we're doing Google Drive, we're doing Gmail, where clients sometimes get like a Google Doc, sometimes get like a Google presentation, but then when they upload creatives, they upload it to Dropbox, but when you send it to them, they get into Google Drive. And then now we're just like, let's just put everything in Google Drive. That way we can completely remove Dropbox because we're also paying like $500 a month for that. So like, it's like all these like business stuff that like no one tells you like, oh, you got to do this. It's like, it just happens because you're kind of just like growing and you're just like, and I always tell people like when you're growing, you're kind of thinking about like, hey, what if this is 2-3 people? But then we like to think about it as like, hey, what happens if the company's 100 people? How can we manage 100 people at once? Because then you set up yourself up for success in the long run. And especially when you want to think about like a remote team where it's like everybody's got to know kind of what's going on, especially when you're in different time zones. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to manage a remote team is everybody's time zones. So even for us.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Even for us, we made like a Google Doc, like a Google Doc or like more of like a Excel doc, right? Google Sheet of like everybody's time zones. Say, hey, when are you working and when is the overlap, right?
It's like, funny. Yeah, so I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and I just never thought about different countries or time zones. Or one of the biggest things that I found that was a problem was the hour changes.
Yep.
Because my lead designer was in Australia, and then I had another one in Ireland and one in South Africa or the Netherlands. She would switch between there.
Yeah.
And then one was out west. And so like I would have literally like all these different time zones. I was looking at my world clock every day on my phone. Yeah. That was the only thing that kept me like, okay, they're probably working right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that with remote teams, you need to consider. It does become, it's particularly with calls. I feel like email is one thing because you could post something in Asana or Basecamp or whatever, and they'll get to it the next day, but calls are where it's really tricky. I think there's also, I know another good question for you would be, how do you balance your time when you're not working? Because it can be very easy at night if you want to relax and be with your family or do a hobby, but then the other guy's working or the gal's working and they're like, hey, I have a question on this. You can fall into a trap where you're literally just working 24/7.
Yeah. And I think this is where like, it depends on who it is. So for example, if Wilson lives in Taiwan and we're completely like 12 hours, he's 12 hours ahead, right? So if it's like 11 here, it means it's midnight for him, right? Or it's midnight right now. But basically, like if like he'll message me and he needs something from me, like I'll be like, okay, cool, like I'll help you out. Like in case like we have to like review an interview, it's like, hey, this is the only time we have it, right? So it's like we're pretty flexible, I think. But that's why this sort of like sheet that we made, it's like, okay, what's like your core working hours and what's like your, hey, I'm on, but I can respond, but maybe not respond, right?
Gotcha. So, that's an interesting dynamic right there. So because you probably do have to have time for like deep focus work versus admin work where you can message back and forth and have some like flexible time. That's probably a good principle I have there.
Yeah.
To where you have like, you're off, like don't contact me. I'm not going to answer in this segment, but then you do. I guess unintentionally, I kind of had that to where I would have, like I would not work 8 hours in a full day to where I didn't respond to anybody. I would just have like a couple hour block where that was my deep work time. But then the rest of the time I could flip back and forth between project management and then tasks that I needed to get to or what that would come up. I'm big on having an hour at least in your day of reactionary work time to where a widget breaks on a site or something happens, you can get to it and you don't have to put something else aside. I imagine the same is true, particularly with a team.
Yeah, mostly just like ad hoc things that comes up for the team. Like, hey, like it's like it's so funny because as your team gets bigger, you like experience issues that you just like don't think about. It's like, hey, like something happened with my family, I can't work today. Or like, hey, like something happened with this. I'm like, oh God, like I didn't really think about this random issue that you were probably having, right? It's like all this stuff that like as your team gets bigger, I think that's sort of like something I've learned is just people are just like so unpredictable. Like it's just like so crazy. Yeah.
Now, did you take from your experience working in California and in these other agencies, did you kind of learn like how they manage their team and apply that to what you're doing now? Do you have any lessons that you learned like that?
I think the biggest lesson I learned was probably that most people want to know when they're, and this is something that we try to get better at. It's like most people want to know when they're doing good or doing bad. And they just really want good, honest feedback about how they can improve. Because I remember when I was working in California, like I had a boss and great person, but he would just like never tell us how we were doing. And then you're just kind of like, so am I doing good or am I doing bad? And people hate getting told they're doing bad, of course, but I think it's better than, it depends, obviously. At least for me, like depends on the type of person, right? The great people love being like, okay, how can I get better, right? How can I get better? Whereas we always had employees where it's just like, they just like don't want to, they think they're the best. I'm just like, okay, like, I don't know how you think that, but then like you have other employees who are just like, let me know what's wrong. How can I improve? Because I want to just get better and better. And that is probably the hardest part when you have like these A players that want to know how can you get them even better? Because we're like, whoa, like you're doing a really, really good job. Like I'm trying to read as much as I can to know, okay, what feedback should I say? What can I say to you? How can I possibly push you even further, right? And that's like the hardest part. Yeah,
I like that. It was kind of a cool quote you said there. The people who like the best workers, the ones who want to get better or ask how they can get better. That's a great thing to keen in on because if you get the people who are just can't take constructive criticism well, or I think more importantly, don't own up to any problems that they create, or it's very clear like they could have done a better job, but if they don't own up to it, that is definitely something to watch out for. Because that can also, have you had any issues? I'm sure everyone has who runs a team, but like you have to be careful that negative thoughts and some of that stuff doesn't spread to other workers. Have you ever had to let somebody go who was just spreading negativity, or it's like a cancer we had to, and you hear it every once in a while. And then when you start hearing it more, it's like, okay, like we talk to them. It's like, hey, like people are saying this, like blah, blah, blah. And then we had to let them go. And I think firing someone sucks, but like we said before, it's like all that negativity does spread quickly to the company, and either through like PMs, like, hey, blah, 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 or through just like in general, like talking through like lunch or random talks. Right. But I think that's probably one of the worst things that you could probably do is like keep someone like that, even if they're like a great person. We've had to let people go because of that, and it sucks. But I heard a great quote that I think relates to this, and that is slow to hire, quick to fire. Is that something you live by? Especially now?
It's so hard. Yeah. It's like a great quote, but like firing someone, I think it's like so hard. It's like, it's
I know, I am, with the idea, like I talked about with different industries translating the business. I was a drummer in a rock band, And we were pretty serious for a while. And our bassist at the time, super nice guy, heart of gold, was not the best musician and was just a little lackadaisical and would just like sometimes he would show up to a show and forget his bass. So we're like, where is your bass? Like there was problems like that. So eventually we let him go and we got this other bass player who was very professional, really talented. But pretty soon we found out that he was a negative like cancer. Like he just spread that negativity. Everything was negative. And then all of a sudden we kind of realized the feel of the band changed. It went from like we enjoyed being around each other to like everybody was negative. We were bitching about other bands. We were getting jealous more. We were getting like entitled, like we should have been bigger than we were. All these little negative things. We were complaining about shows and promoters and stuff. And then we realized this guy, like his negativity, even though it was just one comment here, it just spread. And so we ended up firing him essentially, which was a really good learning experience for me because I did it like face to face. It was still one of the most awkward experiences of my life, and he was crushed and he was very upset. And essentially fired him and brought our old bass in. And we were like, you know what? We can work on the other stuff. We can make sure he has his bass. We can work on the time management, but it was worth it to have somebody positive over somebody negative. Even if some of the values were different there.
And that's so true. And exactly what you said. It's like the negativity it's the slow comments that just creep up on people. And the best employees, that at least that you have, will tell you like, hey, like that's how we find out. It's like, hey, like this is what this person's saying. And it's like, I don't think that's right, because they also are feeling that negative energy. So like you want trusted employees that can tell you things. And I think that's so important to have like great relationships with people in your company, because you don't want to be just like this like boss employer type of relationship. Like you kind of want to be like, well, you want to care about people. And it's like, hey, look what's happening. And that's how we knew. But yeah, similar to what you said before, it's like you just gotta like, firing people sucks, especially in person. When like you see them, you're like, hey, just like leave your laptop there. Like you can just go. You can you can go home. Like it sucks. But yeah, I think the key thing, what you're saying with your band thing, it's like a bad mindset can't be changed. But there's other stuff like work ethic. You can change that. But having a negative mindset is really, really hard to change to somebody. And especially when they're just like negative. Like for example, one person, I'll be like, hey, like this person was like, what, 23 years old? I was just like, hey, like I think you need to read this marketing book about like copywriting. And then the person was like, no, I know everything about copywriting. I'm just like, what? I was like, whoa,
red flag, right there.
I was like, whoa, like that's crazy, because like, how do you know everything when like you didn't even study that? Or like, I know you're not good because I'm seeing your work, right? It's like, but it's after a certain while, you kind of like give people chances, like anybody, like any employee, you have to like, can't just fire people. Like some laws here in the US, right?
Sure.
It's like, hey, like,
but I imagine at your level, you know, when there's like something that, particularly now that you have such an in-depth hiring process, I imagine number one, you're weeding a lot of those people out. But if somebody does get through that, I imagine you're much quicker to recognize that. And it is, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't care what any laws say. If something's going to take down your company, it's got to be cut out.
Yep.
So it's crucial. And I think
it's
that's
so
a really
important.
valuable point. Yeah.
I think it's so important, because remember, I always tell people like it's your company or whoever it is, like you are making the decisions. Like this is why you started. If you have someone like this that's going to hurt you, why would you? And like sometimes like some people don't understand it, but I'm like, hey, it's my money. Like I don't want to. And it's not. I tell people all the time, it's not about the money. Sometimes it's about the opportunity cost of the person's costing your company. Like for example, like we hired somebody, and for 6 months they just like weren't doing anything, and then me and Willis were just like, whoa, like I didn't care about the money. It's like 6 months we didn't grow. We're just like, whoa, that's like a waste of time for us. And that's how we think about it now.
Gotcha. So we're really talking a lot about managing a team this size remotely. So we've covered a lot of really cool tips on building the team, how you've done that, managing. Do you have any other tips, particularly at this level? Because managing a few people is totally different than 25. So we talked about having some sort of like internal communication lane where it's either Slack or Asana or Task Manager versus project management. But what else have you learned with managing remote teams? Like, do you guys have deadline? I guess what's the contributor that helps your business grow while also managing that many people? Is it deadlines? Is it like sharing wins with people? What are some things that have helped you
Yeah, yeah. So we have all that stuff. Yeah. So like we have like a book club every week that media buyers talk about books to keep like informed with each other so they can keep learning. We have Flex Friday, which is every Friday. It's once a month where you sort of show the wins of what you did for that month. So cool. People can like, because it's so hard to meet up. It's like, hey, look, guys, I read this book and I learned this skill. Or hey, guys, I implemented this tactic that worked really well. We also have obviously Asana for project management. We have, I'm trying to think what else we have for this stuff.
Do you do team calls to get the team together certain times a month or like anything like that?
Yeah, so we have team calls, like the creative team has calls. We also have like the media buyer has calls every week. We also have every Monday we have like the company wide call where like everybody gets together for half hour to discuss like the company for the week. We also have,
because that's the other thing, you could spend all week on calls with a team.
That. Exactly. Yeah. My schedule is always calls. It's like, so for example, this week is probably one of our busiest next 2 weeks because we have performance reviews for everybody in the company and I think that goes back to kind of like what I was saying before. You need to establish this early because if not, it's a very easy thing to not do. So every 3 months we have performance reviews with everybody in the company. And this is a self-assessment and also of a assessment of what you want to do the next 3 months. And what we use is a system called OKRs, Objective and Key Results. And it's by this book called Measure What Matters by John Doerr. Really good book. So this is something like you kind of have to just build a muscle for it, where you start early with like your first one employee and then progress this through now everybody does it. So everybody now knows how they're measured. So that's what we have here. So this week is like crazy because like, we're like, okay, send me your OKR, and then me and Wilson will review it, and then we have a meeting to discuss it and say, okay, this is what you did well on a scale of 1 to 5, and then this is where we see improvement, and then now this is the goals for the next 3 months. So it's like one of those things where you just have to like build the muscle for it.
What do you do mostly now in the agency? Do you find yourself running the team more than anything, or are you more like visionary? Sales, that kind of stuff? Or I imagine you're probably not doing as much sales now. At this level, what do you do mostly?
Oh, I still do a lot of the sales at the moment. So I actually just finished a new like video sales letter this week that I recorded. And then I also do a lot of the pitching of any sort of client that comes in. Really that helps because I have the experience of running the company, but also have like my previous experience in my e-commerce companies. And that helps me. You probably know, like as a founder and you're talking to another founder, like what we call it here in sales, it's like you get the founder boost, which is like automatically you're going to get closed more because you're talking to the founder and you can make any decision on the fly. Right.
Oh, I like that. What a good quote. The founder boost, the founder conversion or something like that.
Founder boost. Yeah. We call it the founder boost. Like it's because like when someone asks you a question, I've talked to other people about it. It's because like, they're like, Kevin, you can just say yes or no. Like you don't have to talk to anybody for like confirmation. Like, oh, can you do this percentage? Like, let's say we're doing ad spend. Hey, we charge 20. Can you do 19? I'm like, sure. Right. Whereas a sales guy would be like, oh, let me go talk to my boss. And that's like adds another layer. Right.
Ah, gotcha.
So you see how like I can make these sort of quick decisions that they like. That's like, oh yeah, I know I'm talking to the person in charge. It's like, right. So it's.
Yeah, that's a great point. Wow. What a good sales point. Because for somebody in sales who has to run up the ladder, they're like, well, I'd love to do that for you, but I have to see. Then it's like, wow, this person, What an interesting thought. I've never heard that before, but that definitely makes, so there's a lot of value with being in a position like you are as the founder or a CEO or any other type of position where you're at the top, but you're also doing sales. And even as a freelancer, if you have a small team like that, the same method applies. Like you can still say you're the CEO and founder of your agency. Maybe you just have 2 people who you subcontract, but you're the decision maker and you can say, yep, we can do this or we can do that. That's a really valuable point, man. I like that. And it is interesting. Another point I really wanted to hit on too, when it comes to managing teams before we wrap this up here, is we talked a lot about your story about kind of where you came from. I'm glad that we did because I know that holds a lot of weight with your team because they know you can talk to them, you can speak tech. And I know I'm sure with social media, it's a little bit different than your background with coding and stuff. But at the same time, I imagine you can talk. You can talk the tech stuff with your team, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, and then even before that, like we and Wilson were doing all the Facebook ads for people before we even hired the team. So like, they're still like learning everything from us, like all the coding, all the tech. But yeah, it's so important, I think, that the team knows like what your experience was, because it's like, okay, like these guys know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's I think for us, like a mistake we did was like people would come work for us, but they wouldn't know like who's Kevin or who's Wilson. And you really need to educate sometimes like your employees on who is the founding team, because at a certain level they just don't really know you that well. Like your first 10 like know me. Like my first like 3 hires, like they talk to me every day. Like they come to me for anything. But then like as you're hiring more people, it's like you're kind of slowly like not as connected to them, where besides like, hey, what's up? How are you feeling? Right? Hey, okay, cool. Like, so I think, I don't know. I always, that's something I struggle with right now too. It's like, how do I keep that sort of like close relationship with the people that I have that aren't like the first 10 employees, right? Aren't the first 15. So it's something you always struggle with.
Yeah, that I wonder if there would be some opportunity there for almost like a get to know you guys as your team grow, even if it's like an internal Q&A, like your team could just ask you guys questions. I imagine that could be really valuable because, I imagine at that level, they do want to get to know you and who they're working for, particularly if there's different levels. If you're not working directly with the boss or the CEO or the founder, if there's like 3 levels, you ideally want to hear more about the person at the top. I used to be a cabinet maker at a tour bus customizing shop. And when new hires would come in, they would always wonder about the owner because I knew the owner. So my family used to be friends with them. So I kind of had a personal relationship there. But for people who came in, they knew nothing about him. He just wasn't in the shop ever. So it was like a god that came through the shop once a week when he was in there, and people would flock to him. I think that's a really valuable idea. Maybe just some sort of segment monthly or whatever, just to get to know people. And I know you hit on something too really quick I wanted to touch on, which was the sharing the wins. I have a buddy who was a co-founder of a platform called Content Snare, which is a platform for collecting content for clients. And he told me he transitioned from being a designer and developer to being the owner of the business. And he found himself always giving the problems to the development team. Yeah. So they were always depressed because every time they'd hear from James, he'd be like, oh God, what do we have to do now? And he caught himself doing that. And then he realized, you know what? I'm hearing all the good stuff from customers. I need to start relaying this to the team. So I love that idea of having some sort of like win segment where the whole company can hear like some really good stuff that's going on.
Yeah, but it's exactly why we did that, because we would always tell them like, hey, this is messing up. We're like, no, there's actually a lot of good stuff that people just don't know about. And like I said before, it's so important. And I think another sort of important thing that, like, if you're thinking about your company too, is at least we're trying to get better at is like, in the beginning, it's always like a flat structure. Like, oh, like there's no hierarchy. And I think it works well for maybe 3 to 5 employees. But then like, as you grow, we're noticing that like, it's like, no one knows who's boss. And they're like, Kevin, are you my boss? I'm like, technically, yes, I am. But like, technically I'm not, right? It's like, technically, yes, like you work for me, but it's like, I don't really manage your day to day. So I don't really know like if you're doing well. So like, I can't give you feedback because I don't know. And then like, well, like, is this person your my boss? And I'm like, I don't know. I think so. Like, it's like, so I think
it's like a whole new set of challenges because you got to have the hierarchy in place at some point with that many people.
Yeah. And then that's sort of where we're working on right now. And that's like I always tell people like, we're not perfect. And like, I think it's so important for you as a business to see where the issues are and sort of think about how do you fix them. Like, for this, I have to read books. I'm like, okay, I gotta go read a book now because I'm like, how do I learn how to do this? I've never done it before besides the companies I worked at, but let me go Google saying, okay, how to do a perfect structure hierarchy? Because we're seeing this sort of pain point right now where no one really knows who's their real boss. And again, goes back to what we said before too. It's like, how do you move up now, right? Because if everything's flat, like who's like head of the department, who's head of this, who's head of creatives, who's the creative director? Like, then if you're not a creative director, how do you become a creative director, right? And that's like, I think that's sort of for us, it's like the business, but also we have to think about like people's lives because everybody wants to move up in their career. And you have to, as a boss, think about other people too. It's not just yourself now. It's like, hey, they're going to be here for 2-3 years. They want to go somewhere else in 3-4 years. It's very naive to think they're going to stay with you forever, right? So
particularly if you're hiring, like in the case of web design, if you hire a subcontractor at $25 an hour, it's likely they're not going to stay there that long. So if you want to keep them, there's got to be some sort of vision for them, and you got to see. I was always big on when I first started hiring my main designer. I constantly asked him like how he was feeling. Did he enjoy the work? what was he wanting to do over the next few months? Like, was there an area he was interested in diving into more?
Yep.
That seemed to be really effective at like us having a really good relationship for the long term. Now, again, I don't have the experience with managing this many people, which is, I think, where having these sort of like department heads, you kind of have to. Like when you start your business, you're wearing every hat in the business. And then once you get to about 5 people, you could still manage everybody. But I feel like once you get to 5 to 10, that's a whole new ball game. And then I'm sure from 10 to 25, you're entering a whole new ball game. I don't know what your vision is for the business, but if you guys want to get to like 50, I'm sure everything's, you're going to have to 3x everything you're doing, basically, or at least 2x everything you're doing.
Yeah. It's tough. Yeah. And we want to get to 52. We're just like, okay, how? But then we're just seeing like so many cracks. Like, okay, like we need to hire this person. Okay. We need to hire, like, do we need a real HR manager? Okay. What are all the benefits? Okay. Like, what's the onboarding process like? Okay. It's like all this stuff that like, when it's one person, you're like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. Like it's ad hoc and they understand it. But then like when you're hiring like your 20th employee, and they're like, well, did everybody go through this process? We're just like, yeah, it's kind of messy. Like, no, that's like, it's like,
Well, and I know we talked about the guys from Basecamp earlier. I've read, I think, all their books to this point, and
they're pretty good books.
I just love the idea that you don't have to grow if it's outside what you want to. Like Basecamp, I think, is still about 50 employees, which is insane for their profit. Like
they make so much money. It's so
they
crazy.
They just got to the point where they could work it out with 50. So I particularly like, not many of my audience are going to get up to 25. Maybe a big web design agency could, and I've talked to some people recently who are doing big agencies, but these same principles apply to just one or a few people, which is great. And before we wrap up, because I want to ask you one final question here, but one thing you said I really liked, and I think this is important for people to hear, is that in the beginning, it's good to do the work, because when you get to a position that you are in, it's going to help you relate to the people you hire. And they're going to know, like, well, Kevin went through this, so he has to understand the project scope. Like for web designers, there's nothing worse than a salesperson who sells a website and then they give it to the designer and developer, and they're like, "There's no way we could do this for the budget that you sold." So I think there's a lot of valuable. I just wanted to say that for people who are in the beginning doing all the work, but maybe you have dreams and aspirations of being the CEO or the visionary, and you don't want to be in the weeds. There's a lot of value in what you're doing, and then you can start to hire that out, and it will definitely translate.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because it helps with selling too. Like one of the biggest questions I get is, Kevin, like, can I get you to run my campaigns? I was just like, no, sorry, like I'm not gonna do it, because like when you know it so well, it instills so much confidence in that prospect. They're like, oh wow, like if the founder knows it, that means everybody in his company must know it too, because they're probably training them. And I think that's so important, especially when I like go deep in like Facebook ads. They're like, oh wow, like you know it so well. I'm like, yeah, like I know it because I did it before. Obviously, I don't run it now, but I have a team that I've trained to sort of get that up. But yeah, it's so important. And that's probably one of the biggest questions I get. Like, oh, can you run my campaigns? I'm like, no, sorry, I can't. But like, I have a team I have my team that was actually pretty good, so they'll do it for you.
Now, do you link your team in the process, like when it comes to onboarding or even sales? Do you have like people on the sales call with you to kind of introduce them, or like has that helped with conversions?
So usually our process is they'll come back to us, we'll schedule a call like on Zoom, whatever, and then I'll do like a 30, 45-minute call. And then depending on like their budget and within like 5 to 10 minutes, I think like with anybody that's sort of done like this for a while, you kind of know if it's going to be a good fit based on like what the client says, how they're saying things. You're like, okay, like I can tell you're going to be a hard ass client. Like, okay,
I can literally tell within the first 2 sentences of an email, I can tell exactly what this person's going to be like.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny because people always ask, like, how do you know? I'm like, like you just know.
Yeah. When you're in sales for a while, there are just literally a few types of people, and you can lump people in. Now, some people have variants of their personality. I'm a big guy on DISC. When I did some business training, I learned about dominant people versus interactive people versus stable versus cautious. Like there are these like 4 main types of people, and everyone will kind of sort into these categories. And I thought it was totally bogus when I first went through it. And then as I went on, I was like, oh my God, that is 100% true. Like, and I have the same, I can tell with students now. I know what kind of students are more dominant and how I need to coach them versus people who are a little more cautious, and how I need to encourage them in certain areas and talk to them differently. So Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know if you've applied that to any of your team, but I know it's huge when you work with people because you have to know, like, you can talk to a dominant person differently than you would a cautious person.
Yeah, and it's like just your language patterns. I tell people like it's selling is just language patterns. Like for us, like let's say you're saying like, oh, like I'll increase your profit, right? And then they're saying like, let's say for example, they're saying revenue, and you're saying like net sales. Like, okay, like say what they're saying. Okay, hey, I'll increase your net sales. That way you're like connecting with them. So all these like sales techniques and tactics, like use the words that they're saying, even though you know that's not how you would say it. But for them, it feels like, oh yeah, this guy gets me, right? So
yeah,
like,
it's one of my biggest sales tips. I've talked about it a few times in the podcast, but yeah, I call it matching and mirroring, and
just exactly matching. Yeah,
identifying a keyword, because I used to do that all the time. If a client would say, I just want our website to just be fresh and modern. If they said that early in the call, I'd wait till the very end and I'd say, all right, well, this looks good. We've got a plan for you. What the plan is to make you a website that's going to be fresh and modern. And then they're like, oh yeah, fresh and modern.
That's exactly, yeah, exactly. It's like, it's probably one of the best tactics you could use. It's not just a sales tactic. It's actually a tactic in like general in life too. It's like,
oh yeah, absolutely. You can do it relationships or family, whatever. Yeah.
But yeah, Kevin, it's like,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. But I'm saying like sales, it's like, I think at least coming from me, you probably know too. It's like, I never learned sales, but then like anything, like I just read books and watched YouTube videos, and I was just like, whoa, like just small tips and tricks can really make that process a lot better. Going back to kind of what we were saying before, like Asana, we have like a template for hiring. We also have a template for sales. Every question I ask on a sales call is templated. Like even starting from the beginning, where it's just like, hey Josh, can you hear me? I literally have that in my thing. Yes. So basically I'm getting you to say yes already. So that way we can start the conversation. Okay, great. So you're in this like, okay, great. Kevin's you're saying yes to me, and then go from there. Everything is like templated. Like I don't leave any, like I tell people like, just template it. It's like a script. And people always say, you probably know, people are like, oh, but it's like, is it going to sound real? I'm like, look at your favorite movie. That's all script. Like you think the actors are doing it ad hoc? No, like just practice. Go into the mirror and practice. Right?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about the small yeses and how that can lead to a big yes. Because if you do ask a lot of questions where your lead is saying no all the time, or you get them to like, do you like your website? No. If you had problems, or, if you just get them to say no all the time, it's actually, it seems like it might be a really good lead, but sometimes that can harm you if they're
and also I think too, if they say no or anything like that too, it's like, it means they probably don't understand it, and then you can just like re-say it in a different way. I'm not sure if you heard it, but what we call it is like looping. It's like, okay, like maybe they don't understand this, let's loop them around with a different way. It's literally the term, like loop them, right? Okay, they didn't like fresh and clean. Okay, what I say, like modern and sexy. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, great. So now I know this is what you think of that term, right?
Okay. Well, Kevin, we're going to need to do a round 2 on sales, man, because I think we could go for hours on that. So let's save that for a round 2, man. But this has been great. We covered, I think, some good ground on, we started with your story and the value of doing some of the work. In your case, it was coding and figuring out that you wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I could see your shift from having these opportunities, being a designer, being a developer, to being a business owner and running multiple businesses and taking what you learned into Void Media here. So you started, with you had your, I'm sorry, what was your partner? Was it Danny? Wilson. Sorry. I don't know where I got Danny from. So yeah, Wilson. I'm never going to forget that now, because now I'm thinking of Tom Hanks with the volleyball now. So you've got, you guys started the business, Angels List, some other places where you're, getting some good leads, and you're managing a small team at first. Sounded like once you started scaling, you really needed to think about your hiring process. Got to have those internal systems. You talked about using like Slack and settling on Asana and some of these other tools to be kind of your hub as far as where you guys all communicate. But then what I really liked, what you talked about with a team of your size of 25, is you're doing things to keep them engaged, knowing the hierarchy, doing things like the wins, the books, the good challenges, it sounds like, to get people to stay with you. And you talked a little bit about where you're headed. I guess my final question for you, man, is what advice would you give for somebody who wants to scale, even if it's just a few people, but they know they want to make an agency bigger than themselves? What could you have, like one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I think even for us, the best thing that helps us scale is just having like good books of accounting of like who you can actually hire. I think for us, it's like we would need to know our P&Ls like every month. That way we can project our cash flows. That would say, okay, great. If we bring in, Danny, he should be good for the company for at least 6 months with the current clients we have. That way you can then say, now I only need to bring in 2 more clients to go back to the previous revenue that we were happy with. So just like having a good understanding of your numbers, I think is so important.
That's great. I wasn't expecting that from you.
Yeah.
I figured it'd be something else, but it sounds like having a data-driven approach, because I guess you have to at that level, right? You have to be in numbers. You have to look at the numbers at that level.
Yeah, you have to know, like, okay, who can we hire? Like, okay, how much money? Like, let's project our salary 6 months out. This is what our expenses would be. Let's say we don't get any. Like, let's say you don't get any new clients. Can you afford the team still? Right.
Okay.
And then you can see, like, okay, I only need 2-3 more clients paying this much to be happy again. Right. So
awesome.
It's like happy. It's like your own internal happiness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like, not stressed out that, like, how am I going to pay these people? Right. So it's like,
yeah. Oh, it's huge, man. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for taking some time. I know you're a busy guy. I know you said you got a lot of calls this week, so I'll let you get to it. Really appreciate you sharing what you've learned so far. Like I said, I think maybe a round 2 talking about some sales tips would be really cool. Where can my audience go to find out more about you, man?
Just voymedia.com or just Kevin at voymedia. You can always email me. That's probably the best spot. Awesome.
And you have a podcast as well, right?
Yeah, it's the Digital Marketing Fast Lane. So really, we do interviews with other founders, but then we also talk about Facebook ads and just we try to not do Facebook ads because we know that marketing is more than that. So we talk about, like, just ad concepts of digital marketing, ad copy, creatives, because I tell people all the time, it's like business. You can apply it for many things. So don't niche. We try not to be like so niche, but of course that's our audience. We try to be very tactical on that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, Kevin. Well, great, man. I'll link that up all in the show notes. Thanks so much for your time. And until next time, man. Thanks for
having me.
Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.